The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Station atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized.
Hold on. It's Monday, August 13th, Tuesday, August 14th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night and a great weekend as well. I am your host, Dave Scott, broadcasting to you live from the Great White North, on top of the very smoky mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio, and we say hello to all of you joining us tonight. If you want to look at our archives and take a listen, they are free on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Don't forget, tickets are officially on sale for the first annual Caribou Paracon, presented by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers, September 28th through 30th. You can go to the Questers website, that's questers.ca. Click on the fall conference, get your tickets right now. Come see Grant Cameron, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, Lorian Fenton, and so many more, including myself, speaking at this event. I want to shake your hand, so make sure you are there. Tonight's show is brought to you by the YouTube channel Ensuho. Sebastian Martin brings high-quality messages to the masses. Go to spacedoutradio.com, click on the Ensuho banner, and subscribe to their channel today. Tonight, we are taking a trip back 70 years to Los Angeles, where one of the United States' most famous unsolved murders took place. It was January 15th, 1947, where a beautiful 22-year-old named Elizabeth Short had her body found in a suburb. The precision and the callousness of this murder was second to none at the time and led police down a mysterious path which included strange letters scripted from letters cut from movie posters to handwritten notes. The killer was taunting them. Elizabeth would become more famous as the Black Dahlia. In the decades to come, many suspects have been thought of to have committed this crime, but no one has ever been charged. It's highly likely the person who did kill Miss Short is now deceased himself. Tonight, going in depth in this story is author Piu Eatwell. Her book, Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder is on Amazon right now. I would love for you to pick it up after the show. Then at the bottom of hour number 3, we get to the encounter with our strange, weird news of the day with Everett Themer. Piu Eatwell, pardon me. Thank you so much for coming into Spaced Out Radio all the way from across the pond in Europe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
I am very excited to have you here because I love true crime. There is something about it that is so I don't even know how to put it. It just seems so real and something that we can all grasp onto. Have you always had an interest in true crime, and was that your passion when you decided to write?
Yes, I have always had an interest in true crime. My background, actually, before I became a writer, was as a lawyer. And as a lawyer, although I focused mainly on commercial law, I did do criminal cases, which took me all across the UK, which was where I was based at the time. And that gave me an interest in old cases and looking into old cases. And so when I started writing about, almost 10 years ago now, I immediately gravitated towards the kind of stories which I'd found so interesting when I'd been a lawyer.
So having a fascination in law, even though you didn't practice criminal law, it was just something that kind of came naturally to you, and the inquisitiveness that came along with it.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that combined with my interest in history meant that I was really interested in historical cold cases. So my other true crime book that I've written is actually based on an Edwardian murder mystery, a Victorian story. And the world is very, very different. It's, London, Dickensian London, which is obviously a whole miles away from Los Angeles in the 1940s. But in all these cases, there was something in the story that really intrigued me. In both cases, there was a mystery, which I really, really wanted to crack. And in both cases, there was also a fascinating historical world to explore. And in both cases also, the actual crimes were a background to kind of interesting issues. And I think that's the other thing that's always drawn me. It's that I'm not just interested in the crime itself and solving it. I'm also interested in the way in which great crimes become a touchstone for a wider examination of the society in which they take place. And often these kinds of crimes, and Jack the Ripper is a good example in Victorian London, they acquire sort of mythic status, and they often acquire a sort of meaning beyond the crime itself. I think the Dahlia is a good example of that as well. In the end, it's a horrific murder, but then there are horrific murders committed in Los Angeles every day. Why was it that this one has become so famous that everybody around the world more or less has heard about it? I mean, most people, you might not know all the details of the crime, but most people, if you say the Black Dahlia, they'll go, oh yeah, that says something. And so that was one of the other things that intrigues me is, why is it that these cases become so famous and remembered and retold and, exaggerated, if you like, and grow throughout time?
I do have to ask, because you are so far away from Los Angeles, literally probably around 4,500 to 5,000 miles, if not further, what draws you to American crime?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and to some degree, I did actually encounter a certain amount of skepticism in the US. I think partly because there's this British writer, attempting to solve our most famous iconic murder. I think there was a certain amount, certainly on the West Coast and in the local area, from other authors who have written on the case or experts. There was a certain amount of skepticism about that. I think the answer is, in terms of what interested me, I mean, on one level, obviously, Hollywood is universal. Hollywood is something that intrigues the world and that everybody is interested in. It's not just the preserve of people living in Southern California. And the kind of world of film noir, of course, which influenced me quite a lot in my research and writing of the book. It was the atmosphere I wanted to recreate when I was writing the book. And you may have noticed that the chapter headings are actually named after famous film noir movies. Again, that's something that I've always been, I've been interested in, and which drew me. And I think, again, is a part of Hollywood which goes far beyond, the borders of just the USA.
I can see that, but are there no, outside of Jack the Ripper, no real, I hate to use this term loosely, interesting or fun to research cases in the UK or France or in that Western European area?
Sure, of course they are. I mean, as I said, the book I wrote before The Dahlia was about an Edwardian murder, and actually quite an obscure case. Which was very famous at the time. It occupied headlines for decades, but now nobody's heard about it. So I think, for me, it's not really a question of whether a case is famous or not. Although, I mean, there's certain famous cases I would not touch. For example, Jack the Ripper, because it's a book, it's a case that, there have been so many books written about it. I just think it's very, very difficult to find anything new or interesting to say about it at all. The Dahlia is quite unusual in that sense because it is a huge case, but actually there've been relatively few books written about it. And in fact, the most famous book is James Ellroy's book, The Black Dahlia, which is actually a novel, and it's a brilliant book, but it's not a factual examination of the case. So that's one interesting thing about the Dahlia, is that there's relatively little that has been written about it, considering what a famous case it is. And then the other point is, as I say, I don't really if I'm interested in a case, I will write about it. And if that means going to Australia or New Zealand or the States, then that's just something I will do, because that is the case that I feel I can write a book about. And so I don't consider myself, I live in Paris now, I used to live in the UK, I was born in India, I'm actually half Indian, half English. So I consider myself a citizen of the world, and I consider that, I will write about anything I find interesting. And, I feel that the kind of mixture of experiences I've had in the countries that I lived in mean that I bring something to my books which is different. I mean, that's not to say, I think, there is no one way to write an interesting non-fiction book. There is a space. Obviously, Ellroy is a homegrown Los Angeles writer who lives and breathes Los Angeles, and that is one of the great strengths of his fiction, that he comes from that perspective. But I think there's also space for people to write from outside. And I think particularly in this book, for example, where there is evidence of, widespread corruption in the police force at the time, there's some benefit in coming to that story from outside, from someone who's coming without any preconceptions or ideas, either positive or negative, about the police force and about, the society at the time.
And to have an open mind on it, because you are so far away, to look at this case is sort of romanticized true crime aficionados, because we're dealing with a beautiful 22-year-old young lady, a horrific scene, with such precision and mystery around it. What attracted you to this story that you figured as you were sitting down thinking what you should write next, that this should have been the one?
Well, I think the thing that really intrigued me about this story was the personality of the victim. I just felt that so much had been written about her, and this 22-year-old girl, would-be starlet, who shows up in Los Angeles in the 1940s hoping to make it big. She was the beginning of a big wave of girls who were doing this at the time, and in fact, that very fact created a sort of moral panic in Hollywood and in the States generally. There was this feeling that, women were all showing up, these young women, and that, they were kind of not doing the conventional thing. They were opening themselves up to all kinds of risks, that they were no longer, if you like, within anybody's control. And so this victim became translated into a sort of a totem and a symbol, a poster child for all the moral dangers of Hollywood. And yet it was very hard to get any sense of what she was like as a person. And so that was really one of the things that really drew me was, who was the person behind this crime? What was she like, and what were her hopes and aspirations?
So as we start to open up this conversation into Black Dahlia tonight with you, let's learn a little bit about Elizabeth Short, because she is the victim here, and it does revolve around her, because in the end, an innocent young woman who had starlet looks ready for Hollywood is dead 70 years ago.
Absolutely, yes. So Elizabeth Short was that was her real name. Was a girl who was born in a working class suburb of Boston. She came from a broken home. The father had walked out on the family at a very young age, so she was basically brought up by her mother and with her sisters. And so she showed up in Hollywood just hoping to make it big, like so many other girls at the time. And she fell in with a group of other young girls who were all trying to do the same thing, renting a bunk bed in a rooming house just off Hollywood Boulevard. They would pay $1 a night, and they would be 12 to 16 of them all crammed into one room. And there are pictures from the newspapers of the time where you can see these girls on these bunk beds, and there's one dressing table that they're all sharing with all their alarm clocks set at different times. And that's the kind of life that they were living. And she fell in with perhaps a slightly what you might call a bad crowd, exploitative men who were out there trying to catch women with promises of making them big in movies, but really just looking to get them into prostitution. She never became a prostitute. She was never a prostitute, but she did, because there was no other way really to get by, she did go out with men and have dinner with them, stay overnight with them in return for a free meal, a car ride, or whatever. And that, again, was something which was swooped on by the papers at the time and made into this kind of great moral lesson to the young women of the day, that, the dangers of going out and being a single woman and sleeping around.
But she was a little bit of a party girl. I mean, here she was, 3,000 plus miles away from home, living her dream in Hollywood, trying to get movie roles and any type of acting gig that she did. She did have a head on her shoulders, knowing that, there was, a real seedy area in the start of not just prostitution, but pornographic movies as well. And she did try to stay out of that scene, which was very, very strong of her. But she did like to go out for drinks and have a good time, as any 22-year-old should.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think this is where you see the kind of moral, the duplicity of the moral standards of the day, because in lots of ways, her behavior today would really raise no eyebrows at all. Lots of young girls go out and party and, hang out with their friends and have fun, and they expect to be able to date men without any kind of moral judgment. So her behavior now would not be considered anything other than what you'd expect of a normal, feisty young girl. But at that point, obviously, it was very much more of a kind of conservative society. And also women were starting to do this kind of thing for the first time. You're talking about the immediate post-war period where a lot of women, the role of women was changing very, very quickly. And women were starting to go out to work. They were beginning to enjoy the freedoms which came to them really after the war. And that in itself caused a certain amount of social anxiety and stress. And I think you see that in a lot of film noir movies. There's an anxiety about the role of women. You have the sort of femme fatale figure who's almost always a woman who's to some extent rejected the kind of norms expected of her, a woman who is not married, a woman who's seductive, who kind of revels in sexuality. And that woman is always seen as dangerous. And of course, this is what happened with Elizabeth Short, was she became conveniently translated into a sort of totemic figure, the real life femme fatale, stalking the rainy streets of Los Angeles and the very convenient kind of moral to take home for the young women of the day.
Do we know what she was like personally back then? Like, did she have a moral compass? Did she know where to draw the line? Because, looking at the way in reading up on her, she, like we said, liked to party a little bit, which was probably a little bit, out of the normal for somebody her age. But she also wanted to make it in Hollywood, which a lot of young women, and even men for that matter, would do what it takes to be famous.
Absolutely. I think, in lots of ways, this is what's strange about the story and how it never seems to lose its relevance in a way, because when you look at the events of Hollywood in the last year or two and the Weinstein affair and so on, obviously the Weinstein case is very different. We're not talking about a murder in any circumstances there, but that case did mean that people re-looked at this whole issue of the casting couch, and you had all these actresses coming forward with the Me Too movement and the stories of harassment and abuse and so on. It was quite incredible. And I remember when all of that happened, it was shortly after the book came out, thinking, plus ça change, as the French would say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This was all the same thing. It was the same world. It was the same troops of these beautiful young women hoping to make it big and having to tread this very fine line with men in order to try and, being expected to do certain things in order to further their career.
Do we know if she ever did anything sultry in order to enhance her opportunities, or was she someone who just didn't want to go down that road no matter what she was offered?
Well, we do know that she slept with a few men. In one of the police reports, it said that they could only find 3 men out of all the men that she dated, and they were a lot, whom she'd actually slept with. So she did have this reputation as, they would call her, the police reports certainly refer to her as a tease. And there is this kind of judgment in the police reports, this implicit judgment that she was a tease, and she in effect almost deserved what happened to her because she led some man along and, to a point where he couldn't basically control his rage. And then, this is what happened, which is of course is quite shocking, the idea that that anyone could deserve to be killed in the way she was and bisected and tossed out on a sidewalk. So there's a whole other layer of interpretation of her behavior there in the police reports, which is really quite disturbing. But certainly in terms of her behavior, she was a very beautiful girl. Everybody agreed on that. And she had a sort of something that you couldn't quite define as well beyond just beauty. She had this kind of some allure that definitely was very, very attractive to men. And she liked to go out and flirt and so on. She was less keen on actually sleeping with them. And, as I say, all of this would really not add up to anything much today, but at the time became, a cause for a great deal of gossip and discussion.
Leading up to her body being found on January 15th, 1947, do we have a little bit of a short timeline on what Elizabeth Short was doing leading up to that date, or is that still a mystery as well?
We do have a bit of a timeline. We know that until the end of 1948, so through most of 1948, she was in Los Angeles, and she was staying at the home of a Los Angeles businessman called Mark Hanson, who was a well-known Hollywood nightclub and movie theater owner, a multimillionaire, very shady man. He liked to keep himself to himself. And he sort of operated on the borderline of legitimacy. He was on the fringes of the underworld with connections to a number of major underworld figures. Anyway, Mark Hanson, he was originally Danish. He'd come to the States early in the century, and he'd wound up in Hollywood after traveling around a number of different places in the States. And he was separated from his wife, who had a big house in the Hollywood Hills with his two daughters. And he had an apartment in just off Hollywood Boulevard on Carlos Avenue, where he would entertain girls, and he would offer them rooms in his amazing home in exchange for, it's unclear exactly what his relationship with all of them were, but what's known is they didn't pay to stay in his rooms. Anyway, she'd fallen in with him, and she'd been staying with him in November and December, and by all accounts, he was obsessed with her. He had a thing about her and very possessive of her. And it's unclear as to whether they actually had a relationship or not, a sexual relationship or not. Based on evidence that's come to me since the book came out, I think they probably did. But he was very jealous and possessive of her. There are accounts from various friends saying how he would insist that if she had any boyfriends, they dropped her a couple of blocks away, so that he wouldn't meet them. And he was very angry if he saw her with anyone else. And they had this very stormy relationship and fell out, and he threw her out the house. And when she was thrown out of the house, she had nowhere to go. She had no job. She had no money. And so she wound up in San Diego, where she crashed out in a movie theater. And she was discovered by one of the girls working in the movie theater, crashed out there. And this girl, who was really nice and friendly, said, "Look, do you want to come and stay with me?" She was called Dorothy French, and they had a little house on Pacific Beach. She lived with her mother. And so Elizabeth Short ended up staying with her for the rest of December and into the beginning of January. Then towards the end of that time when she was there, she appeared, the Frenches noticed that she seemed to be very, very nervous and concerned. There was a time when a mysterious trio, 3 people, came banging on their door, and Elizabeth refused to come out and answer the door and hid. She seemed to be running away from something, but they could never get to the bottom of what it is. Over this period, she'd been dating a married man. And she got him to give her a lift back to Los Angeles on the evening of Thursday, the week before January the 15th. It was the 9th. And that was the last day anyone saw anything of her. He was, in fact, the last person known to have seen her. He dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on the evening of Thursday, the 9th of January.
So she was, kind of all over the place, almost like a vagabond, trying to find herself when obviously she ran into trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. She had no money. She had no home. She had no job. And so she basically drifted around, she tried as far as possible to crash out with other people, and she tried as far as possible to stay in Mark Hanson's house, because I think it was safe is not perhaps the right word, but at least it was a roof over her head, and it was probably a fun place. There were parties there every night. She was hoping to make contacts and meet someone who could help her in the movie industry, and obviously Mark Hanson had a lot of contacts. That was one of the things he promised all these girls, that they would be movie stars. He would introduce them to the right people, and that was the kind of life she was living, hoping to be discovered.
Mm-hmm. So as she was bouncing around, do we know how many men at the time she was dating? Because there were a number of suspects, and by the sound of it, as having the reputation as a tease, there would have been a lot of men that were truly upset with her.
Absolutely. I mean, this was one of the problems that the police had in conducting the investigation, was that, she had so many boyfriends and acquaintances that they were very, very difficult to track them all down and investigate all of them. I mean, one of the police reports actually said that they were aware of over 50 men who'd had some sort of contact with her in the weeks up to her death. And so we're starting from a very, very wide group, and that made it really hard. And everybody said she was one of these really friendly girls. She would just start talking to somebody on a bus and having a chat with them. And so, it made it really hard to narrow down the field of potential suspects.
At any time, was she in contact with her family back in Boston? Because at 22 years old, I don't care who you are, unless you've had a horrific relationship with your parents, you still need to hear mom and dad's voice every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is another case, I think, where, middle-class parents gave this kind of shudder of fear when they read about this case, because, in some ways she had a completely double life with her mother. She had a close relationship with her mother. She wrote to her very regularly. But from the tone of the letters we have, and not many of them are available, but, she gave this completely different picture of what was going on. She wrote these bright, happy, breezy letters about how she was meeting potential directors and so forth who might give her a role, all the auditions she was having, what fun it all was. And you would have no idea of the reality of her life, the kind of grim fight for survival, and going out with all these different men and trying desperately to scrape together a living. You would have no idea of any of that from the letters. I mean, she'd originally started going to California because she suffered from various forms of asthma and breathing problems, and she suffered very much from the New England winters. So she was sent out to California originally to try and improve her health over the winter months. And then she became addicted to the whole idea of Hollywood and becoming a movie star, as so many girls do, and that was how she wound up there. But certainly her mother had absolutely no idea about the reality of what she was doing. And this is one of the most painful things, I think, particularly for the family, was after the murder and the way in which Elizabeth was portrayed in the press, that they had to deal with this image of her daughter, which, was completely alien to her and the sisters as well.
Explain that, because this obviously leads into January 15th, so maybe we should break that down first. Take us to that horrific day that has gone down in infamous history.
Well, yes. The whole thing starts really on the morning of January 15th, 1947. It's just after around about 10 o'clock in the morning, and a young housewife called Betty Bersinger was out strolling along with her a little girl in the stroller, in the baby stroller, in an area called Leimert Park, which was a working class suburb of Los Angeles at that point. It was just newly developed, actually. It was mainly still marked out as housing lots, and a large number of the lots had not even been developed. It was part of that whole post-war housing boom of people coming back from the war to start families for the first time. And she was out walking with the baby. She was on her way to the shoe shop to get her husband's shoes repaired, and she saw this cloud of flies buzzing over the sidewalk in the distance. And she thought, that's odd. What on earth is that cloud of flies doing? And she came closer and she saw these two pieces of white shining against the sidewalk, and it was very, very white. She recalled years later when she gave an interview about it that it was the whiteness of this whatever it was that really struck her. And when she came closer, she thought it looked like a shop mannequin, and she thought, that's very odd. Why is there a shop mannequin lying on the sidewalk? And then the closer she came, she thought, oh my God, that looks like a body. And then it's quite an interesting interview she gave, actually, because her next thought, which is perhaps typical of a young mother, was, oh my goodness, there are children here. What are they going to think? And so she rushed off to the nearest house to phone the police, and there was no one there when she rang on the door. So she went to the next house and someone answered, and she said, please, can I use the telephone? And so she went through and phoned, and the call, there's different accounts of exactly the time the call came through, but it was around about 11 o'clock in the morning to the emergency department of the police saying, look, there's a dead body. She said, there's a dead body on the sidewalk. Please take care of it, and just put the phone down and ran away. And then perhaps forgot all about it and happily went off to the shoe shop. And that was the beginning of probably one of the biggest manhunts in the history of California, really, kicked off by a young housewife. Mm-hmm.
In the area where her body was found, was that an area that was not used to criminal activity at the time?
Not particularly. No, it wasn't really an area associated with criminal activity. It was, as I say, a kind of up and coming new white working class suburb. It was the kind of place where people who'd fought in the war might be settling down with their new wives and their kids, just at starter homes for new couples and young families. It was nowhere, the areas of town then that would have been associated more with crime, downtown and so forth, the red light district. It was not far from those areas, but it was certainly very, very different. And it's not the kind of area where you would expect to see a site like that at all. No, not a bisected body on the sidewalk. No.
So what made this case so grotesque when they found young Smart?
Well, I think the thing that made it particularly grotesque, I just mentioned in passing, was the fact that the body was bisected into two pieces, which is very, very unusual. And so I think it was the grotesqueness of the crime. It had been tossed out on the sidewalk. She'd actually been killed elsewhere. She'd not been killed on the scene. So it was clear, because there was very little blood on the scene. So
yes.
It's clear that she had been killed in a different location, and then this was the body dump site. But apart from the fact that the most obvious and grotesque fact that the body had been bisected, there were also some really horrific mutilations. The mouth had been slashed into a kind of hideous clown-like grin from each side of the mouth up to the ear had been slashed, and it was actually that act which probably had killed her. That was determined by the autopsy report. But there had also been a number of incisions in rather strange patterns, weird, grotesque patterns made on the body, and in particular a vicious vertical incision from the navel down to the pubic bone. So there were a number of, and most of those, the slashing to the mouth had been done when she was alive. The other incisions had been done post-mortem. In other words, they'd been inflicted after death. And so what had happened, it was determined by the autopsy surgeon that she had been killed probably shortly before. The body had been there on that location for, it was determined, less than 24 hours. She'd been killed at another location, and then the body had been dumped in that spot in the early hours of the morning of January 15th.
It looked like the way she was butchered, because I think we can use that term, that she was butchered, that there was a lot of anger in regards to this, but almost like an angry science experiment, because of the fact that it looked like her body had been almost completely drained of blood. And like you said, there was very little blood on the scene when they found her body. In your professional opinion as a lawyer, have you ever dealt with or known people to deal with such sodomy of a body like this?
Well, there are a number of other cases, historical and present, which, reflected, that are equally vicious. I think one of the things that was unusual about this case and perhaps a clue to determining what happened was that there were signs of conflicting pathologies in terms of what was done to the body, because the slashing, it was determined that she had actually been tortured and beaten for several hours before. She'd been bound up and tortured and beaten before the slashing to the mouth. And of course, these other cuts were made post-mortem and the body was bisected post-mortem. So there's evidence of different pathologies at work. There's a kind of violent, sadistic lust murder element, which is the beating to the body and to the slashing of the mouth. But there's also a slightly different pathology at work in terms of the incisions and what was done post-mortem, which suggests a more sort of cold and calculating pathology than the person who struck blows to her and tortured her and so forth. So that, to me anyway, when I was investigating it, suggested from quite an early stage that there may have been more than one person involved. And actually, when you read the book, it transpires that is actually where I come out. And in fact, what's happened post, because the hardback of the book came out last year, and subsequent to that, I've had a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of emails, questions, people coming forward with new information and so on. And the picture that's coming forwards after the book has come out is more and more leaning towards that direction. And I'm more and more convinced that actually there was more than one person involved in this particular killing.
I do have to ask, 70 years later, how do you get new information coming forward?
Well, that's interesting. You wouldn't believe that with a case like this it was possible, but I have actually had people. One thing that's interesting about this case is that, because it is so notorious and so horrific, people don't want to talk about it. So in the process of researching it, I spoke to a number of people related to the killer, the person I believe was the killer or killers, and a number of other people, even people peripherally involved. For example, who were staying at the location where I believe the murder to have taken place. And their descendants, they might talk to me on the phone and tell me what they think, but they really did not want to be quoted. They did not want to be identified in the book. And what's happened subsequently is that people have come forward who often, there were stories circulating in the family about this. It was something that was discussed, but they've never actually come forward in public before. And again, a number of them, although they talked to me about what they believe may have happened or their experiences, they did not want to be identified because it is such a horrific case and it's so famous, and people just don't want to be associated with it.
Once police found the body and they started trying to put together some sort of case as to what happened, how long was it before they started getting these taunting letters from the Black Dahlia Avenger?
Yeah, I don't like this Black Dahlia Avenger tag because it's, I feel it's very simplistic. And, the fact is the police got a lot of letters and postcards and goodness knows what after the murder. And almost all of them were probably hoaxes. It's a bit like the Jack the Ripper case or any of these very famous murder cases. I mean, unfortunately, there are a certain number of crackpots and nutcases who will, just for the notoriety, write in and phone in and, of course, cause a big police nuisance because they then waste a lot of time chasing up things which aren't going to go anywhere. And this was very similar in the sense that, because the case was huge, it was, the first edition that covered the discovery of the body in the Los Angeles Examiner sold more copies than the edition that covered the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It was that big. So there were a lot of people who jumped on the bandwagon who wanted a bit of the glory. So out of all the various postcards and phone calls and this and that and the other, my opinion is there's only really one letter, or rather it was actually a package, which almost undoubtedly came from the killer. And there's a record of one phone call made to the editor of one of the local newspapers, the Los Angeles Examiner, shortly after the murder, which it preluded the letter. It preluded the package. It was a phone call made which warned the editor that this package was going to arrive. And those two pieces of communication, I believe, were actually genuine. The rest of it, I mean, who knows? I suspect most of it was just, hoaxes.
And at that time, there was a real want and desire, even so much so today, where there's a real desire for people to try and seek any type of fame, even if it is in infamy. I mean, we have a lot of people, even going back to a previous case of D.B. Cooper, where there's been over 1,000 people claim that they were him.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? But I mean, this is an early case of exactly this kind of thing happening. Over 200 people in all confessed in inverted commas to the Dahlia killing. So, it's an interesting exercise in psychology itself as to, what prompts these people to come forwards. But it is this desire for fame at any cost, even if it's infamy, as you say. And I mean, again, that for me was interesting because when you set that against the background of Hollywood and the kind of desperation of people for fame, I mean, so many people come to Hollywood to be famous. For me, that was also symbolic of the kind of dark, crazy side of Hollywood, is that, people will do anything to be famous, even if it is to confess to one of the most, grotesque crimes of that century.
When the police started to decipher that they were getting notes from the real killer, how were they able to determine that those notes were from the person who most likely was the one who took the Black Dahlia's life?
Well, as I say, the only written communication, which I think, is, more or less 100% certain did come from the killer, was a package that was sent into the Los Angeles Examiner shortly after the discovery of the body. And this package contained the contents of Elizabeth Short's purse and her diary, her notebook and diary. So, diary is not really the right word. It was an address book. It didn't actually have diary entries in it. It had names and addresses. Now, clearly, only someone who was very close to Elizabeth Short at the time of her death could possibly have had the contents of her purse. And so that is almost certain, and the police were sure about it, and everybody who's investigated the case is virtually certain that must have come from the killer. Now, it says several things about the killer. Firstly, that he or she, obviously one you don't want to assume that it was a man, but whoever it was who did it was, very clever, because the package itself the contents of the package had been soaked in gasoline before being sent in, which meant that obviously virtually all fingerprints would be eliminated. The only fingerprint was on the exterior of the package, and it was very smudged and very, it was very badly smudged, so it's virtually to be unusable. It showed that the killer was very clever and had thought through what they were doing. And it also showed, and for me, this was a key thing, it also showed that this was a killer who, on some level, desired publicity and wanted to communicate, who also desired notoriety. Because, why would a killer do something so risky as to send in to the papers, the newspapers, possessions or objects belonging to the victim? That was clearly somebody who on some level wished, was glorying in the act, in what they had done, and wished to communicate with the press about it. And of course, the nature, aspects of this exhibitionist side to the killer were obviously evident in the way in which the body had been dumped, that it had been displayed with this sort of theatricality on a sidewalk in a part of Los Angeles where people passed and where it was obvious it was going to be found. I mean, if you look at a killer like Ted Bundy, he was very careful to conceal all the victims. They were dumped in places which would be very unlikely that they would be discovered for some time. So this was not someone who desired to make a secret of what they'd done. This was someone who it was almost somebody who seemed to be getting a high out of living dangerously, out of taunting the press and the public, of pushing as far as they could go. And that to me was quite a key indication of the nature of the personality of the killer in this case.
Did police think that they were on the trail of a serial killer or just a madman, mad scientist?
Well, I mean, this has always been open to debate. There were discussions that this was a serial killer right from the beginning, and they are kind of competing schools of thought on it. There's a group of people who are convinced that the Dahlia killings are part of a series of murders. There was a podcast recently called The Dahlia Murders, and there was a whole string of all these killings which were supposedly all supposed to go back to the same person. And there was speculation in the press about that. Before the Black Dahlia moniker came up, which is obviously, that's an interesting story in itself, but before that came up, they were known as the werewolf killings. And so there were all these headlines about the werewolf murders before it became the Black Dahlia murders. So there's always been that side of it, but there's also a separate school of thought, which is that this was a kind of one-off, that this was a case of, someone or some people being pushed to an extreme situation and something that would just never be repeated. It could have been a meeting of different minds and different people that just created this one fatal thing that was not going to be repeated. I don't think you've got enough evidence either way, personally, and it's such a long time ago, it's going to be very, very difficult it's hard enough just to establish what happened in this case without, embarking on trying to sort of link it with too many others. But personally, I'm more inclined to the one-off theory, although there are one or two other cases, one in particular, which I think do share certain worrying characteristics with this case, which potentially I think could be linked to it.
You say there is multiple people potentially involved in this, and most of the people who have been kind of finger pointed at are all just single individuals who seem to have a run-in or a tie to her one way or another, whether it's through teasing or evening parties and galas or whatever it is. Why do you believe that there was more than one person involved? And I'm asking you this as we got about 2.5 minutes before we need to go to our first break.
Right. Okay. So perhaps I should give a short answer to that, and then we can develop it further if you want later. But I think, firstly, as I say, you have this intimation from the very beginning that there are different pathologies at play here. as I researched my book, I mean, this is certainly not something I really thought. I mean, at the beginning, I did come to it with the sense that there is one person, which is what you would automatically think. And when I wrote the book, and as it transpires, I do pin it on basically one person. What's happened is that since the book came out, there's been further evidence. In particular, there was a key piece of evidence from the son of one of the gangster cops on the case, who came forward and gave me a lot of very, very interesting information, which is it's in a postscript to the paperback of the book, which is coming out shortly. But that evidence really convinced me that actually there's more than one person. This man, his father was on the gangster squad at the time, and he was very close friends with one of the investigating officers. And as a boy, he went out with them. They used to go fishing in the mountains, and he heard they used to tell the stories of their old days on the gangster squad and Mickey Cohen and so forth. And they discussed the Dahlia in some depth. And he heard all of this firsthand, and he confirmed to me my theory about who the killer is in the book. And he also added the fact that other people were involved. And the more I spoke to him and the information I got from him, the more it fitted together with what I had found out in the book.
We got about 45 seconds with you before we have to go to break. So I'm just going to hold it off right there, because we got a ton of information coming up next, because we got to get into the suspects, including one in general whom, after researching this is who I'm picking to do it. I'm going to wait until after the break to tell you who I think did it. But we're also going to get into a lot of the corruption in the LAPD around this case, and could it be going on even today as new evidence comes forward and they're refusing to hear it. Our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio is author Piu Eatwell. She is the author of a book called Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. You can find it on Amazon right now. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back with hour number 2 of the Black Dahlia coming up right after this.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4 Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm going to take you for a ride every Sunday night on Spaced Out Sundays. I'm going to set up your week with some strange tales from across North America, from psychic readings, Sasquatch, UFOs, to the most haunted locations. Come join me at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and let's get weird together. I'd love for you to join me. Spaced Out Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
There's news And there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio. Tonight, I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the program, Kenya Aisa is going to join us. We're going to talk spiritual life skills as we go searching for our Zen. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. Hi to everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio Network. And don't forget, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. That's where we store our archives. We'd love to have you subscribe. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Chronosynchronicity. Chronosynchronicity is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Don't forget, if you want to attend the September 28th through 30th first annual Caribou Paragon put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers, we would greatly appreciate your attendance. Go to questers.ca. That's questers.ca. Click on Fall Conference. You can pick up your tickets right now. We'd definitely love to see you there. Grant Cameron, Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and so many more great speakers hanging on out. Tonight we are talking with author Piu Eatwell. We are talking about an infamous case called the Black Dahlia. And she wrote this book. It's a fantastic book. I highly suggest you go on Amazon, go pick it up. It's called Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. Piu, welcome back.
Hi.
Glad to have you here.
Hi again.
Glad to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for asking me.
Oh, no problem. No problem whatsoever. That's kind of what we do around here. Right before the break, I had asked you in regards to whether or not you figured there was one or more people involved in this case. There were a number of suspects, yet you are now leaning, because of new information, that there might be a second killer. And you went into a little bit of detail about that right before the break. Did you want to expand on that, or would you like to move on?
No, I'm very happy to expand on it. Basically, in the book, and are we worried about spoilers or not? I'm quite happy to talk about who I see the killer as being, because it's already been all over the press and in the newspapers, and I don't really see any reason not to do that. So anyway, I come out with the theory that the killer was one Leslie Dillon, who was an unemployed bellhop at the time, and who wrote himself to one of the investigators on the case and implicated a friend of his, saying he basically wrote to Dr. Paul DeRiver, who was the police psychiatrist at the time, who'd been given the job of interviewing all the potential suspects, all the confessing Sams, as they were called, the 200 people who came forth and confessed to the murder. And Dr. DeRiver was in charge of interviewing them all and trying to establish whether they were likely to be the true killer or not. Anyway, Leslie Dillon wrote to Dr. DeRiver in late 1948 saying, look, I know who the killer is, and he's a friend of mine, somebody I met in San Francisco last year. And anyway, a correspondence developed between the doctor and Leslie Dillon, in which the doctor became convinced that Dillon was the true killer. And so a process was set up to investigate and track down Leslie Dillon and interview him and get him to confess to the crime. And that is part of the story that's told in my book. Anyway, I come out with the theory that it was Leslie Dillon who was the killer, and that Mark Hanson, the businessman, the Hollywood businessman with whom Elizabeth stayed, who had the house in Carlos Avenue that we were talking about earlier in the interview, was also involved, and in fact was the reason for the subsequent cover-up of the murder, because he had connections with the police. The subsequent evidence that's come out, which is in the postscript, as I say, to the paperback, which is coming out shortly, is that Hanson, I in the book say that Hanson was the reason for the cover-up and was somehow involved. The evidence that's come out afterwards is that Hanson may have been more closely involved in the actual murder itself. So in other words, I think it's impossible now at this distance of time to say exactly who did what. I mean, there was so many things done to this unfortunate woman. You know, she was beaten about the head, she was tied up, she was tortured, her face was slashed, there were incisions made on the body, it was bisected, it was dumped on a sidewalk. You know, if there were 2 or 3 people involved in that, it's almost impossible with this distance of time to say who did exactly what. But I'm coming out, particularly since this further evidence has come forth, I'm coming out more and more to the conclusion that it was at least 2 people, Leslie Dillon and Mark Hanson, possibly a third person, Jeff Connors, who was a friend of Dillon's, who were involved in this killing, and that it took place in a motel in downtown Los Angeles.
I'm going to be honest with you. That absolutely surprises me, that outcome that you were giving, because in all the research I did with this, the name George Hodel kept coming up.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the theory, I mean, George Hodel basically comes out from books written by his son, Steve Hodel, who is convinced that his father is the killer and is absolutely determined to prove that, and has written a lot of books on this subject. And I think that's one of the reasons why there aren't that many subsequent books on the Dahlia case, is that, you know, that Steve Hodel has kind of dominated the field, and people were so convinced when they read his book that George Hodel was the killer, and so they sort of felt, well, this case is solved. And I actually thought that when I read the first of Steve Hodel's books, the Black Dahlia Avenger, I thought, well, this is it, this case closed, it's solved. And it was only really when I got to looking through the contemporary papers, the police reports, the grand jury documents, all the evidence underlying the case, that I really began to question that. Because when you look at the contemporary documents and papers, there is absolutely virtually no reference to George Hodel. Now, that is very unusual. I mean, I know from my experience of doing criminal cases, commercial cases, whatever cases, it's very, very unusual for a major suspect or person who's done something to just not turn up virtually in the original paperwork. And if you actually look at the evidence, in my opinion, there is very little to connect George Hodel with the crime. I mean, the most compelling piece of evidence that there is really is a transcript of a telephone recordings of telephone conversations in Hodel's house. These recordings were made in the period sort of January through February 1950. And they purportedly record a confession by George Hodel, effectively in inverted commas, confession to the crime, where it says, so what if I killed the Dahlia? No one could prove it now. And that's been read as a confession to the crime. Now, I think there's a number of problems with that. Firstly, you know, George Hodel was very well aware at this point that he was being recorded. If you go through the transcripts, which I have done, I've gone through the transcripts of these phone recordings in detail. There endless references to the fact that he knows he's being recorded by the police. He's got this forever, his housekeeper is forever banging. He's saying to her, open the drawer, check, I know, check here, check there. And you can hear her. It's actually recorded on the TV, on the telephone transcripts, you know, her banging, opening and shutting drawers, saying, look, I can't find it. And he's going, there's a bug here. They're recording me. So given the fact that there's a car from the Hollywood Citizen News parked outside the door. So given the fact that he's clearly paranoid about being recorded, it just seems to me beyond belief that he would actually confess to a sensational murder on the telephone when he knows that that's going to be relayed straight into the ears of the listening police officers. Secondly, apart from that telephone conversation, that 2 lines, you know. I mean, the other point to make about these transcripts are they are not literal transcripts. They're actually notes. So they're not actually a transcript of every word that's said in the phone conversation. They're the police officer's notes who's sitting there on the other end, because you didn't have sort of automatic transcribing machines then, obviously. It's a police officer on the other end who's listening in, just making short notes. So we don't actually even know he really said that. So what if I killed the Dahlia? No one could prove it now, because those are just the notes. There could have been any number of things said in between that. The other point is that apart from these telephone transcripts, or this basically what amounts to 2 sentences, I couldn't find anything much to really connect Hodel with the crime. I mean, it's definitely true that he was a suspect, but then so were 200 plus other people. And in fact, he became a suspect actually when he was brought on trial for sexual assault on his daughter. And at that point in time, in the investigation of the case, as soon as anyone who was accused of any form of serious sexual assault automatically became a suspect for this case anyway. So that was when he came on the scene as a suspect. And there's absolutely nothing else that I can see to really connect him with the crime. I mean, there's nothing really to say to tie his home as the location where it took place. There's no reason for him to ever have gone to somewhere like Leimert Park. I mean, Hodel was a wealthy Hollywood, gynecologist. He hung out in, Hollywood Boulevard. That was near where he lived. I mean, this is the white working class district. And most analysis of crimes, big crimes, the body dump site is almost always known to the killer. It's an area he's intimately familiar with. There's nothing that I could see that could connect Hodel with this kind of white working class, quiet suburb of Los Angeles. On the other hand, Leslie Dillon, his aunt lived just around the corner, and he was regularly going past that spot. In fact, it was on his normal route. And of course, there's the other circumstantial piece of evidence that I highlight in the book, which is that Elizabeth's shoes and handbag were found dumped in a trash can literally a block away from where Dillon's aunt lived. So there's a lot more circumstantially linking the body dump site with Dillon than there is to Hodel. So as I say, I mean, from my investigation of it, which was really a very close examination of the contemporary documents and papers, I can't really see anything that connects Hodel with this crime at all, apart from those 2 lines of that telephone transcript. And I just think, well, I mean, it's a pretty big thing to be pinning a murder on someone on the basis of 2 lines in something which wasn't even a transcript anyway.
Well, Steve Hodel, George Hodel's son, was a police officer for 17 years. Why was he so convinced that it was his father? Because apparently he did find some sort of DNA of human remains via police dog around his old house. However, because the new owners won't allow him to exhume any of the property, they can't get in there, and the police are refusing to open up the case to see if that even could be DNA from Elizabeth Short.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I can only give my opinion based on the research that I've done. And I think there's been a lot of mudslinging in this case. I myself was subject to the most vicious trolling and abuse by different so-called experts after I wrote my book. And I don't really want to enter into a sort of attacking thing on any front. So I can't really speculate as to why Steve Hodel is so convinced his father committed the murder. I find it slightly peculiar that someone should be so worried and concerned. Well, someone should be so eager to have their father connected with such a notorious killing. I find that slightly strange. The fact is that Steve Hodel had a very complex and difficult relationship with his father. His father had an affair with, as far as I understand it anyway, had an affair with one of Steve's wives at one point, ex-wives at one point. I think it seems to have been a very difficult relationship. This DNA business in the dog, I mean, that's just, again, in my opinion, it's just speculation. I mean, if you did DNA around almost any buildings, you might well find the DNA for something or other. I don't think there's anything really much to be read in that. I mean, certainly when I started writing the book, I didn't come with any preconceptions as to who did it whatsoever. And I investigated Hodel as I did all the other suspects. I had a link, all the other suspects that I could find listed, and I had files on all of them. And I just came out with the view that I just felt that there was really very little concrete evidence to link, George Hodel with this crime.
What about somebody like, Joseph Dumais? This is a man who apparently gave a false confession.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was, somebody who came forth and confessed to it, and then it turned out he was miles away at the time of the murder. I mean, I don't think he can be treated seriously. There were a number of all these suspects who did come forth, and when it was investigated, it was found that it was absolutely clear that they couldn't possibly have had anything to do with the crime. They were miles away when it took place, and that most of these people, were people who were mentally ill, and either seeking notoriety or genuinely, had mental problems.
Leslie Dillon, did he have the ability, if we compare him to George Hodel, did he have the ability to make those types of incisions in a human body? Because Hodel was trained with a scalpel as he was a doctor.
Yes, but Hodel was a gynecologist. He was not a surgeon. Leslie Dillon, it transpired from the evidence that the police unearthed, had actually worked in a morgue. He had experience of draining bodies, and actually one of the gangster squad officers who investigated the case, J.J. O'Mara, he gave an account of an interview between Leslie Dillon and the police psychiatrist on the case, Paul DeRiver. And in that interview, Dillon apparently, and this is according to the sworn evidence of J.J. O'Mara to the grand jury who investigated the case in late 1949, gave detail. Dillon, in his conversation with Paul DeRiver, showed an extensive knowledge of how to bleed a corpse and the techniques of doing that. So there is evidence that Dillon, as I say, worked in a morgue, and that he was also familiar with the technique of bleeding corpses. Now, this whole business about the killer having to be a doctor or a medical person, again, I think this has been much exaggerated. It's sort of, I wonder if this particular sort of strain of theory kind of runs back to Jack the Ripper, because there've been many discussions about that and the theory that the killer in that case had to be a medical person. If you look at the police reports and also the FBI reports, because the FBI had a file on this case, it's categorically stated that the person who did it, they needed some form of rudimentary knowledge of anatomy or experience of anatomy, but that did not mean that they had to be professionally qualified. This idea it was so sophisticated that only a medical person could have done it is just wrong. It was one train of inquiry, possibly, that a medical person could have done it. But it's clearly stated in the FBI reports and the police reports that just some knowledge of anatomy would have been enough, even that possessed by, for example, by a butcher. So, again, this is something that's been much exaggerated, the idea that it would have to be a doctor who had done it.
Well, it makes sense if Leslie Dillon worked in a mortuary and was used to dealing with bodies, getting them ready for funerals and everything like that. I mean, that would make sense. As you mentioned, Leslie, did he have any, and I don't recall if I heard this, but did he have any ties to Ms. Smart?
Short. Elizabeth Short.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, he always denied, Leslie Dillon always denied knowing Elizabeth Short. But the evidence is that, and certainly this is what's come through from this officer who came forth. I think I mentioned this earlier. There's a ex-police officer called Buzz Williams, who was whose father was on the LAPD gangster squad, and his father worked very closely with Con Keller, who was one of the investigating officers on the gangster squad. And so he was very friendly with Con, and he spoke to him at great length about the case. And according to Con Keller, Leslie Dillon actually knew Elizabeth Short and went out with her, and they all moved in the same circles with Mark Hanson, this shady businessman, because Mark Hanson was involved in the prostitution racket and getting girls to appear in his nightclubs on the floor, do the floor show on the nightclubs. And Dillon was also involved in the prostitution racket, and we know that from the papers. There are many references where Dillon talked about, obtaining girls for prostitution. And in fact, he was arrested for pimping in San Francisco at one point. So we know that both Hanson and Dillon were involved in the prostitution rackets. And according to Buzz Williams, and this is the evidence which, as I say, I put in the paperback, the Dillon and Elizabeth Short went out with each other. And in fact, Elizabeth and Dillon knew each other, and they were all part of this circle of people around Mark Hanson.
Oh, wow. I got to ask you a little bit here, because Elizabeth Short had a period of time where she stayed at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, where so many weird, strange things have happened and continue to happen up until this day. Did you ever look into the weirdness and the strangeness of the Cecil Hotel?
I haven't. I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating hotel, and I think it merits the book in itself. But, I don't think it's got anything to do with the Dahlia case whatsoever, but it's certainly a place where there have been a lot of very strange things, as you probably know better than me. But obviously you've got the Ramirez, the serial killer.
Yeah,
who was there.
Richard Ramirez stayed there.
Yeah.
Another serial killer was killing people in there. Its neighbors call it Suicide Hotel, not the Cecil Hotel.
And isn't that the place where the girl was caught in the lift and ended up in the septic tank or something?
Yes, Elisa Lam. She's actually from Vancouver.
Right. Okay.
So,
And did they ever find out what went on in that? Or
no, nothing in that. That is just still very, very strange, because there's no way that she should have ever ended up in there at all. So it's very, very weird.
Well, no, I mean, I have to say it's an absolutely fascinating place. And actually, at one point, I was thinking of, maybe doing a book about there, because I think there's a whole book to be written. I don't think it's got anything to do with the Dahlia case. But the other thing that's interesting about it, and what it does highlight, I think, is the fact that, there are a lot of these strange sightings and kind of slightly supernatural goings on which have happened, in that area of Los Angeles. And that perhaps touches on another part of my book, which is obviously the motel where I believe that Elizabeth Short was killed, and where, there was this very strange video footage which was shown to me, which surfaced recently.
Yeah, after getting into the Cecil Hotel after all of this and then kind of doing a little research on that, I mean, you're right. That's a book and a movie all on its own. I mean, if there's any building that needs to be torn down, it's probably that one, with the amount of hauntings going on, because a lot of people actually do believe that the Black Dahlia still haunts that hotel on the 10th and 11th floor.
Are you thinking of the Biltmore Hotel?
No, the Cecil.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I really don't think, you can ask someone who thinks that the Dahlia murder took place in the Cecil Hotel. I mean, I don't think it's got anything to do with that. I mean, I'm not even sure there's any evidence she actually stayed there. I'm not sure where you're getting that from. She definitely stayed in the Biltmore, which is where she was last seen on the 9th of January. She stayed in another motel a little way down from the Biltmore. She hung out in that downtown area. We know that she spent time there. That's where this other motel is, the Astor Motel, which is where I believe she was killed. I haven't seen any evidence that she was actually at the Cecil Hotel. I think that there was one person, one of the suspects was had stayed there or was there, one of the suspects of the killing. But I mean, I think it's absolute, any connection of her with this case is totally speculative. I've never seen anything to connect it, anything that convinces me that connects her with that place. Although, as I say, I mean, it's certainly connected with a lot of other strange events, and certainly this Ramirez series of killings. There's that very strange video of that girl in the lift. There's a lot of other weird things going on, and I believe it's changed its name now. It's called something else, and they've tried to kind of clean up its image and really turn a new leaf and start a whole new thing with it.
Well, it's very interesting indeed, because us being a paranormal show around here, we always look for more than just coincidence. And the amount of death that has surrounded that building, whether it's suicide or murderers or people who've been murdered, it is eerie. It is completely eerie when you look at it from a paranormal view. That is for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. As I say, I mean, I think I kind of touched on it really, just in connection with researching downtown Los Angeles in general. And I just thought this is an interesting subject for a book just separately, just looking at it as the hotel and the history of all the things that have happened. And you could do a very interesting book which kind of combined a sort of a forensic research with looking at the paranormal perspective. And I could see how you could do a really interesting book about it. But as I say, I'm afraid, in my opinion, it's got nothing to do with this particular case, with the Dahlia case.
Did you ever, kind of off topic here, as we'll go back to in a second, but this question just kind of popped in my head, so I figured I'd ask it. Did you ever travel to Los Angeles to check out the area to try and get a feel for it?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've already, I spent quite a lot of time in Los Angeles because in the late 1990s, I made a documentary film about the Charles Manson and the Manson murders. And so I spent almost a year in Los Angeles researching that film, and I was living in the Hyatt on Sunset Boulevard. And I fell in love with the place then. I just loved the kind of darkness of the history and the kind of weird paradoxes that you get in Southern California. It's a place of extremes, it's extremes of, weather, of people, of, amazing kind of success and spectacular failure. And the Manson film was, in a way, although that was a film, that was not a book, but we were taking a similar approach with that, in the sense that we were looking at these murders, but we were looking at them not only in the sense of trying to investigate what was happening or what had happened, but also looking at it in the context of the history and of the end of the 60s and the way in which those murders became representative of what was happening, how the kind of 68, 69, how those years, the hippie movement suddenly turned sour. And you have the Rolling Stones concert at Altamont and all this violence and the whole thing, it starts off as this kind of dream and it turns into this nightmare. So anyway, I had spent quite a lot of time in Los Angeles anyway, as I say, researching that. And then for this book, I went back to LA on several trips, each sort of 2 or 3 months at a time. And I stayed at the Biltmore. I visited the Astor. I stayed up on Hollywood Boulevard, and I, went through, I did a tour of all the areas which I refer to in the book. And I did, a lot of on the ground research. Yeah.
How much easier or how much more respect do you have for a topic when you're writing about it, when you actually put boots on ground to tell a true story, rather than being, say, 5,000 miles away and not having the opportunity to go there and get a feel for the area and maybe just the aura of it all?
Oh, well, I mean, I would never, I think I made this point earlier. For me, the fact that a story is not happening on my doorstep does not stop me writing about it. But I have never been somebody who writes about something, without, visiting it or, being there. When I wrote my book about the Edwardian murders, I spent several months in London researching that. I mean, the Dahlia there was an advantage in the sense that, the resources, that there's relatively limited resources on the Dahlia case. It's not one of these cases. The Edwardian case, there were literally thousands of boxes of files on that case. And I had to spend months in the UK going through them. I literally going to the library every day and going through all these papers. The Dahlia case is quite limited because the LAPD has never officially released its file on the case. So it's a limited amount of material, and all of it is available. You can obtain it by you can obtain it on CD. So the FBI sent me what they had. I managed to mount a legal challenge with the LAPD and extracted information from them which they had not released before. But even so, I consider it's absolutely essential to spend a lot of time in the place where you're researching. So, I spent quite a few months out there, and of course interviewing people. You can only interview, you need to be on the spot to interview people and so forth. So, yeah.
I think it's admirable. I think it's admirable.
Well, it's part of, I think, it's part of the process of writing nonfiction. I mean, that's one of the reasons why nonfiction is always a much bigger task. I mean, people tend to forget that with nonfiction, that half the work with nonfiction is actually the research. In a sense, the writing is the easy part, because I never start writing until I've more or less completed the research, or I've done most of it and I have a sense of where the book is going. And actually, that is the hardest part, because that's when you're on planes and you're going off and you're interviewing people and you're spending months on location and so forth. I mean, it's a bit like making a film. It's the same thing. When I made films, you go on location and you would film them. I should just add in here that I worked for a while for the BBC and various UK production companies in the past, and that's where the film about Manson came in. But there was always this interest in documentaries, in non-fiction, in historical crime. Whatever I've been actually doing, those interests sort of surface, if you like.
Getting back to this case, in regards to Leslie Dillon, how did he live the rest of his life knowing that he was always a suspect?
Well, it's a bit of a mystery how he lived the rest of his life, because he basically disappeared into obscurity. And so very little is known about him. I interviewed a number of his descendants who didn't want to be named, although they gave me interviews. And he seems to have lived a very withdrawn life, although he continued to have these aspirations as a writer, which he always had. I mean, that was one of the reasons he originally contacted Paul DeRiver, was that he said he was interested in writing a book about the case. And that, for me, of course, was interesting because it tied in with this whole idea of a killer who puts themselves forward, who somehow wants to get involved in the narrative of the story, which fitted in with the killer who sent the package into the newspapers, the killer who contacted the press, and so forth. Again, you have this idea of somebody who somehow, on some level, wants to communicate and publicize what they've done.
So with him going into obscurity and his family not wanting to talk about it, do you think that they were leaning to the fact that he was the infamous killer?
I think that they have suspicions. I think they have suspicions. I spoke to one of his several ex-wives, and she basically broke down in tears and said that she didn't want to discuss it. And she didn't want to think that he had done it. So, I mean, I think that they have their own suspicions and they don't want to discuss it. They want it buried. I can completely see why. And in a sense, I think that why would, it's very unusual to have this reaction like Steve Hodel and want to sort of have your relative implicated in a case like this. I mean, I would say a more normal reaction is what I saw in the reaction of Dillon's descendants, which is that we just don't want to go back on this. I mean, that would certainly be my reaction. If somebody said that, somebody accused my father of having committed a notorious murder, I think my first reaction would just be, I'm sorry, I just don't want to go down there.
I understand that, but what about the family of Elizabeth Short? They've never had closure.
Absolutely. No, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it, in a sense, it's fair. I'm just saying I can see the reason for the reaction they have. I mean, I think that, the family of Elizabeth Short, it is very, very hard for them. And it always has been. I think that they have been, from the very word go, the way the press covered this case was appalling. I mean, I detailed this in my book, as you probably know, the way in which Elizabeth Short's mother discovered, that that her daughter had been killed. I mean, basically the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner got one of the junior reporters to phone up Elizabeth Short's mother when the body had been discovered. And he told this junior reporter, look, don't tell her that her daughter's been, discovered killed, because she'll just have a fit and we won't get any information out of her. And we want to get all the information about her daughter and get an exclusive. So just say to her, ring her up and say that her daughter's won a beauty contest. That way you'll get all the information about her and her life and her friends and everyone we want to interview. And then afterwards you can just tell her, oh, by the way, she's been killed. And that's basically what happened. The junior reporter, who didn't want to do this, he had to because his boss was breathing down his neck, phoned up the mother and said, oh, your daughter's won a beauty contest. And so Mrs. Short was absolutely delighted and said, oh my God, that's amazing. I always knew she'd make it. She was so beautiful. She was this, she was that. Gave all the information about her, her background, her friends. And then finally I was told, oh, and by the way, her body's been discovered bisected on a sidewalk in Los Angeles, in a suburb of Los Angeles. So, I mean, I think the family of Elizabeth Short have always had a really, really rough deal out of this. I mean, they have been treated very, very shoddily by different parties along the way. And
that is a terrible act of the media, but that's the way they were back then. They were cold, they were callous, they were all about the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is the period of vicious rivalry between newspapers. And, you have the Hearst newspapers, the Los Angeles Examiner and the Herald, which were really kind of tabloid newspapers. They were there to, feed the working class public sensational stories to distract them from joining labor unions and getting really involved in politics and trying to improve, the situation of people, working people at the time. And so that was the strategy of the Hearst newspapers, to basically feed them all these sensational headlines. And there was a bitter rivalry between all these papers. It's recorded how, journalists from the smaller newspapers that were struggling would spy on the big papers like the Los Angeles Examiner, which had, lots of money and were able to investigate these cases. And they would try and steal early copies before they went onto the printing presses to steal the stories and get them out before the major papers did. And there was bitter rivalry. Jimmy Richardson, who was the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner, was in a vicious fight against a fellow Hearst paper, the Herald Express, and the city editor of that was a woman, Aggie Underwood. And they were loggerheads, each trying to get one up on the Dahlia story with the latest sensational interview, the latest sensational headline. And of course, all of this made it more difficult for the police because, it's very difficult to, investigate a case when every single minute, every witness before you even get to them is being paid by the newspapers to run an exclusive and so on.
Wow. Cutthroat. Completely cutthroat.
Yeah, absolutely cutthroat. I mean, this is one thing that comes across, from researching the case was the sheer, ruthlessness of the whole machine. How, this girl, I mean, in a sense, it's the Hollywood machine. It's any kind of big machine. This girl is just a kind of a little tiny speck in this maelstrom of interests and forces that are kind of competing and battling it out over her. And she's a footnote in all of this. She's a footnote in the story, her own story.
Right.
There's so many other interests at play.
Piu, we always like to get our audience involved with some questions coming out of our chat room. Do you mind if I ask you a couple?
Sure.
All right. Renee is asking, whoever killed her, what is your thoughts, Piu, of the motive to the torture and the murder of this poor girl?
That's a key question, really. I mean, I think that the real motive is rage and is rage and a desire to control, and it's the other side of powerlessness, really. Again, I go into this in quite a lot of detail in my book, but there's evidence that Leslie Dillon, who I believe was one of the primary killers, had a serious inferiority complex when it came to women. Deriver gives evidence saying that when he was stripped, it was discovered that he had a micro penis. Now, that to me is telling, because if it was the case, it would suggest a very powerful motive for this murder, in the sense that it was somebody, and Dillon actually, in his various cryptic correspondences with the Dr. Deriver, one of the motives he gives for the killing is rage and outrage that the killer had been mocked. And it's very interesting use of that word, because it suggests to me that it's possible that, she made some kind of, it probably might not have even been mocking, just some kind of light reference to his physical sort of disability, and that set him off. And that to me would be a very logical explanation for the kind of rage and anger which came out in this killing. I
never would have thought that having a small pee-pee or penis would cause such rage.
Well, obviously in everybody that wouldn't be the case. I mean, in the end, loads of people have all sorts of problems and conditions, and the way they behave as a result of it, in many cases, is not negative, can even be positive. I mean, lots of people, for example, not moving away from penises, but perhaps the height, you think of the number of, short men who have achieved great things in the world and gone on to, be hugely successful. So, a disability or a disadvantage can in many cases be a positive thing. But in some cases is going to affect people in a negative way. And of course, that is a complex question of psychology and environment and so on. But I mean, certainly the psychiatrist saw this as being one powerful motive for the killing. And when we go back to the original question here, which is, what were the emotions or feelings that motivated this? I think anger, more than lust, anger and rage and a desire to get revenge and power over someone were major motivations.
All right, let's move on here. Gail is asking, in your thoughts of Leslie Dillon being the killer, what do you think his motive was then? Was it the penis thing, or is that just asking the same question in a different way?
Well, I mean, it is the same question in a way. I mean, it's very difficult to explain this, in summary form, because it's dealt with in a great deal of detail in the book. But and particularly now that I've had this conversation with Buzz Williams, which has really been major in putting the pieces together. In a way, it's very unfortunate that he only came forth after the book came out. But in a way, he only came out because he'd read the book. I mean, he contacted me because he'd read the book, and he said, my God, this is the first time that I've read the story that my father told me. And I couldn't believe it when I read this, because it's exactly what was told to me since I was a child. But we go back to this scenario of basically what turned out, I think, into almost a gang rape situation at this motel, where you have a kind of lethal combination of people who get out of control. I think there probably were drugs involved. It's known that Dillon took drugs. It's known that he, for example, he put drugs in ice cream and drinks and gave them to girls. And it's very likely that there were drugs in Elizabeth's bloodstream when she died. There were attempts to, her stomach contents were removed for analysis, but in one of the very many strange coincidences or mysteries in this case. Somehow they disappeared and no analysis was ever officially given. And that would have shown if there were drugs in her system. But there are witness reports of from the motel saying that a girl with dark hair corresponding to her description was found in a drugged state at the motel. So, I think drugs were involved. I think it was a gang situation. I think Dylan, Hanson, and probably Dylan's friend Connors were all there. And it was a situation that basically got out of control. And that there were various motives involved. I think that there was this fact of the revenge and hatred. I mean, don't forget that Dylan, there was this whole issue with the micro penis. Mark Hanson, there was a separate issue that he was already very jealous and possessive of her, and he hated her going out with other men. And she was known to be a tease. Here you have a beautiful girl who, is unavailable and refuses to be available. So you have a situation where I think basically, things just got out of control. And in the end, it was covered up. The reason it was covered up was because Hanson is known to have had very high connections in the police force. And he was also connected with in particular, the Irish gangster scene in Los Angeles at the time. There's transcripts where he admits that he knew Jimmy Uckley. He was one of the major Irish gangsters who was involved in abortions and so forth in Los Angeles at the time. So, and there was a very close relationship between the police and gangsters at this point. It was a very different world to now. I mean, one point I need to make is that, I'm talking about the LAPD in the 1940s. I'm not talking about the LAPD now. And at that point, there was a very, very close connection between gangsters and the cops. And Hanson was known to be friends with Finus Brown in particular, who was one of the investigating officers on the Dahlia case. And this is another thing that Buzz Williams has said, and this is in, as I say, in the paperback, the updated paperback, that the gangster squad members knew that Hanson was friends with Finus Brown. And that Mark Hanson owned a car dealership on Hollywood Boulevard. And shortly after this murder, Harry Hanson and Finus Brown, who were two of the major investigating officers on the case, were seen driving around in these fancy new cars provided by Mark Hanson. And they were quite annoyed about this and saying, why is it that they're going around in these fancy new cars? They're being wined and dined. They're being entertained. Hanson introduced them to all his girls. Because they'd done him a favor. They'd done him a favor by dropping the case.
So many weird instances in this case that just seem so baffling as to why they even happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are many things that don't add up. There are many things that are baffling. I mean, I think all a genuine researcher can do is to go on the evidence and construct what they feel is correct in their opinion from what they've read and what they've understood and interviewed and so forth from their interviews and so on. And that is basically what I've done. And I mean, I think I made this point to you earlier, which was that after the book came out, I had a flood of emails and questions and letters and some very, very interesting information, in particular this one about Buzz Williams. There was also a man who wrote to me whose mother had been a dancer at the Florentine Gardens nightclub, which is a nightclub that Hanson owned. And he said that she was one of his most beautiful dancers. She was one of Earl Carroll's Golden Girls. She was really, really a stunner. And she had always told him that on the Thursday night before Elizabeth disappeared, this is very interesting because this is after she disappeared from the Biltmore and supposedly no one ever saw her again after this date. That night there'd been a party at Mark Hanson's house, and this man's mother, the dancer, had been at this party, and she'd gone upstairs. At one point she wanted to go to the restroom, so she'd gone upstairs and she opened the wrong door because she didn't know the house very well, and she walked in and she found Hanson in bed with this beautiful black-haired girl. And so she sort of, backed out and said, "Oh, I'm sorry," ran away downstairs. And later she spoke to Mark Hanson and he gave her the name and said, "Oh, that's Elizabeth Short. She's just the budding actress. It's just a fling. It's not going to go anywhere." Now that is very interesting because Hanson always denied seeing Elizabeth Short after she left for San Diego at the end of the previous year. He claimed he'd never seen her again. But this is evidence that actually he was with her on the very night that she disappeared. And apparently, according to this man's mother, she said that shortly after the body was discovered, which was less than a week later, Hanson rounded up all the girls, all the cabaret girls and the dancing girls, and said, you say one thing about that party, and that's the end of your career. You can forget about it. So they were all terrified. And nobody said a word. So, I mean, this is really interesting evidence that's come out since the book came out, and I put into the afterword to the paperback. Subsequent to that, I've had even more stuff. Somebody else has come out who was the son of a relative of Lola Titus, who makes a minor appearance in the book. She's another of Hanson's hangers-on, who one of girls he hung out with and promised to marry, and then he just deserted her, and she came into the newspapers and got notoriety because she shot him in revenge. But anyway, there's always been speculation that she knew something about the Dahlia case, and this relative descendant of hers wrote to me saying that, you know, it was known that she did know about Hanson's involvement in the case, but that again, and also his involvement with gangsters in Hollywood. But again, you know, they were all too terrified to say anything. All these girls who, you know, they were trying to make it in the movies, and, you know, the last thing they were going to do was say something about someone who was such a key player. And you know, that made me, you know, when I was researching it, I thought, this is just too incredible. How would these girls all say nothing about this? But then, you know, we had this Weinstein affair, and suddenly all these girls are coming forth saying, you know, this happened and that happened. And you realize that this kind of thing happens. You know, that there's a huge conspiracy of silence, that these girls who want to make it are too terrified to say anything about their experiences.
We only have about a minute here before we got to go to break, and I want to get in a question from Joe here quickly. And he is asking, there have been thousands of grisly unsolved murders since the Black Dahlia in 1947. Why do you think people are still so obsessed by it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really interesting question. I mean, in a sense, as I said, that was one of the reasons I came to this case, was precisely that, was why is this case, of all the thousands of grisly murders, you know, that have taken place in Hollywood in 1947 alone, why has this one become, you know, world famous? And I think it is partly due to the fact that it's technically unsolved. I mean, anything that's unsolved is always going to be a magnet. I think it's partly because of the nature of the victim. I mean, that there was this beautiful young victim, you know, and I think that's always obviously going to be a source of attraction. And I think it's also because it is a case that resonates through so many other themes. I mean, as I say, we were just talking about this whole idea of Hollywood and the kind of ruthless machine. I think it epitomizes in lots of ways how the American dream can turn sour, you know, how, you know, the dark side of Hollywood, in a way that the Manson case does too. It's right. The underside of the glamour, the other side of the glamour.
Piu, I'm going to get you to hold on one final time here as we are going to go to our final break of the night on Spaced Out Radio. Piu Eatwell is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. She is the author of Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. Piu will be with us for another 30 minutes before we get to Everett Themer and The Encounter. We'll be back with more Spaced Out Radio right after this.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from the Euphor Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
From the mile-high state of Colorado, sharing our signal around the world, I invite you to Spaced Out Sundays. Hi, I'm Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm closing out the week by taking you on a paranormal journey to the world of the weird. Ghosts, aliens, psychic phenomena, I will hit it all in your questions too. So let us highlight the paranormal for you. So come join me for Spaced Out Sundays starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the program, Kenya Aisa comes in. We're going to be talking about spiritual life skills as we go searching for our Zen and our Chi all together. Let's get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time tomorrow night at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome back everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. If you're looking for our archives, they are free on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/spacedoutradio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Chronosynchronicity. Chronosynchronicity. I don't know why I got tongue-tied on that. Chronosynchronicity is your password. Be sure to use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the Encounter online, and so much more. Also, tickets are officially on sale September 28th through 30th, first annual Caribou Paracon, presented by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. We have David Weatherly, Grant Cameron, Lorian Fenton, Ross Allison, and so many more coming in. All you got to do is go to questers.ca. That's questers.ca. Click on the fall conference, scroll all the way down. You can pick up your tickets right now. For the final time tonight, we introduce Piu Eatwell. She is an author out of England and France. Her book, very popular on Amazon, called Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. Piu, welcome back. We're glad to have you to the bottom of the hour.
Hiya.
Now, I got a question from Joe here right before we get into the corruption of this all. And basically what he is asking, and I just got to find it here. There it is. He's asking, is it possible Jack the Ripper came out of retirement and escaped to kill Black Dahlia?
It's possible, but unless he was into time travel, I think it's extremely unlikely. Because what the Ripper murders were taking place in the 1880s, and this is 1940s.
He still could have been alive, technically.
Technically, yes, but it might make a good fiction, but I can't see any likelihood of it in real life.
Wow. Well, let's move on. Let's move on then, because I also want to spend a lot of time this half hour before we got to say goodnight to you about the corruption that you believe was in the LAPD regarding this case.
Yes, this is a key point of the book, that, we're talking about a period when the police force was very, very corrupt. And in Los Angeles in particular, there was a very, very close relationship between the gangsters and the cops. and many of the cops, particularly in certain departments, such as, for example, the Vice Squad, were, being paid off by criminals in order to conduct and carry on their activities. And in fact, roundabout shortly after the Dahlia murder in 1949, there was a huge scandal that almost finished off the Los Angeles Police Department, where there was a big, very well-known call girl called Brenda Allen, who basically had many Hollywood celebrities of the time on her books. And it was discovered that she had been paying off a member of the Vice Squad called Elmer Jackson, who was also her boyfriend. And she'd been paying vast amounts of money to him to let her carry on her business. And this was a huge scandal that rocked the press in 1949, shortly after the murder, and virtually almost brought the LAPD down. And in fact, that's one of the reasons, I believe, why the police was so keen to cover up the Dahlia murder and the connections between Mark Hanson and the gangster squad, because, after that huge scandal, which was the summer of 1949, if there'd been another scandal, and the Dahlia scandal, if it had hit the press, would have been much, much bigger than Brenda Allen, that would have been the end of the LAPD. And I mean, in fact, the LAPD had a major cleanup operation after these scandals of 1949, because shortly afterwards there was a new chief of police appointed called Bill Parker, who ruled the department with a rod of iron and who cleaned out a lot of the corruption on a low level. I mean, it's often said that what Parker did, or under Parker, corruption kind of went upstairs. So in a way, corruption didn't disappear, it just went to a higher level. But certainly the kind of day-to-day corruption on the ground, cops, taking payouts from gangsters at the doors of a nightclub, that kind of thing, that stopped with Parker. But it required the huge scandals of the Brenda Allen case and the potential scandal of the Dahlia case to make that cleanup happen at the LAPD.
The LAPD was very well known for being paid off by gangsters who were into a lot of different things, from, alcohol back then coming out of Prohibition to prostitution. A lot of the elite nightclubs were run by gangsters at that time. Were they trying to recruit Elizabeth Short at that time, and maybe she didn't want to play ball with them? That kind of made it a little bit ugly, which made the police kind of cover things up? Or do you think
I think that's a very plausible explanation also, that feeds into what might very well have happened, because the motel where I locate the murderers taking place, a motel called the Astor Motel, was at that point in the 1940s was known to be a place where prostitutes stayed and a recruiting ground for prostitutes. And at this point we have evidence from several people that a dark-haired girl fitting the description of Elizabeth Short was found to be staying there in a drugged state. There are sightings of Leslie Dillon there, and there's concrete evidence that Mark Hanson was there at the same time. And so it's entirely possible, in my opinion, that that they were actually at this point trying to get her into prostitution or some kind of high level of call girl activity, and that she refused, and that is one of the reasons why this murder took place.
With the LAPD not wanting to investigate this, do you think that there is more information out there that they just haven't released, or do you think that it was an inconclusive case up until this point 70 years later?
Well, I think that the reason the LAPD doesn't want to open the case now is just that, they probably have too many other things. They know it's not going to be beneficial to them to open it up again, and they have many other things to worry about. And I can see up to a point why that's the case. I mean, in the end, there's hundreds and hundreds of live crimes that require investigating. Why go on this course investigating something that happened 70 years ago? So I can see entirely why they don't want to reopen the case and reinvestigate it, and I can totally understand that they don't want to throw public money at something when they've got many, many other more pressing things to do. What I do take issue with them about is their refusal to release the papers for researchers to look at, because I don't really see any reason now, given that all the major players are probably dead, why, with a case of that level of importance, what the harm would be. And I think it would be a good gesture for them. It would show that they were in good faith to say, fine, we're not going to investigate this. We've got a million other things to do, but we'll release the papers so that, people who are researching the case can take a look. And it's not clear to me why they refuse to do that. But, I think that probably even if they did release the papers, there's probably not a huge amount more than what we've got, because for the very good reason that whatever was really condemnatory at the time has probably been removed much closer to the time. So I think that if there's anything that's really revelatory, that would probably have been taken out in the 50s. Because I can see that already in the papers that have been released. I mean, the grand jury documents are a big mess. And I had to sort them all out and put them in order and catalogue them all to go through them. But, I could see where, for example, interviews of people relating to Mark Hanson, there'd be a question. The police officer would say to the interviewee, and if Mark Hanson lost his temper, would he become violent? And this would be at the bottom of the page. And the answer would be, oh, yes. If he got really angry and violent, if he got really angry, he would lose his temper and become violent. And then the next page is just taken out. So whatever was said after that has just been removed. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, having gone through the contemporary papers, that things have been taken out. But that has been years ago. Who knows? It was done before the papers were put on microfilm, clearly. So we're talking about, because the microfilm numbers are sequential. If you look at the microfilm numbers, they're sequential. They go from one to the other. So these pages have been taken out before the documents were microfilmed. So we're talking about stuff that was taken out in the late 40s to 50s. And so, unless they're in somebody's attic somewhere or whatever, the chances of those being found, I think, are very remote.
Do you think that maybe some sort of gangster or someone else had paid off the LAPD to kind of just let this one slide?
Yeah, I think Mark Hanson did. I think there's very little doubt about that from the evidence that I've got, particularly, as I say, this evidence from Buzz, the son of the member of the gangster squad who investigated the case, which is, he categorically says that, the gangster squad were in no doubt that Mark Hanson was in with Finest Brown and Harry Hanson, and that he paid them off to bury the case. And that Leslie Dillon played off on this because Leslie Dillon knew Leslie Dillon was not a fool. Whatever else he was definitely not a fool. He knew that, he basically, this is the theory in my book, and this is what the psychiatrist, Dr. DeRiver, believed, is that, Dillon effectively confessed to the crime. He knew the secret facts which the police had deliberately kept secret about the murders. They'd withheld certain key items of information for the purposes of questioning suspects. Dillon knew those. And he revealed himself to be the killer. That no one was in any doubt. But when it came to it, he said, fine, you arrest me, you charge me, and I will tell all. I will say the whole sordid story about Hanson and the girls and the cops and the payoffs. And, that will be all over the press as well. And so effectively they had no choice. They had to bury the case.
Back then, how much would it cost to buy off the police? Did you ever ask that question?
I would not know exactly how much money would be involved. I mean, I remember reading in some of the evidence that one of the interviewees had said that Mark Hanson, Finest Brown was into the sum of about $5,000 to Mark Hanson, which of course now seems like nothing, but then would have been, more than 10 times that amount. So, I mean, we're talking about sums of money which, are significant, but in the end, they're not enormous. But then, we go back to this whole, I remember talking to, various people who'd done, analysis of the theory of how cover-ups work. And what's interesting about cover-ups is often there's a very few people involved in the initial wrongdoing. All it is one small bribe or something like that, which might not be a huge amount of money, but that, more as the cover up progresses, more and more people get involved, and, they actually feel that they're acting in the best interest. So if they feel they're acting in the best interest, they're protecting the police department. A lot of people involved in this probably felt they're saving the police department, and in their minds, it was, we have the future of the LAPD weighed against this little slut, this nobody. I mean, that's the kind of language that was used about her in the police reports. She's a nobody. Who's she? Who cares? You weigh her up against, the whole future of the LAPD, which is at stake, in the wake of all these scandals. I mean, and in a sense, you see that in the Weinstein affair. You have one person who's actually at the center of it, but then you have all these other people who are covering up for them. Other people who've got nothing to do with the crime as such, but the extent of the cover up in that case, when you think of all the victims who didn't speak about it, all the people who knew about it, who then say they knew about it, I mean, it's enormous, isn't it? The scale of it. Just over the actions of one individual.
It's too bad that the police were corrupt and thought of her that way, because it seems to go really against the grain of what law enforcement was supposed to be about and helping the family get any closure. But the fact that, that continues. I mean, we even saw that somewhat a few years ago up here in the Vancouver area with the Missing Women's Task Force from the downtown east side, when William Picton was killing many, many women, over 60 that he believed of killing prostitutes. And it was kind of written off by the Vancouver police and the RCMP. Well, these women mean nothing to anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. And, I think that happened also in the case of, the Yorkshire Ripper, not Jack the Ripper, but the much more recent series of murders, in Yorkshire in the 1980s. And it was known as the Yorkshire Ripper, where this lone killer was killing. It started off with prostitutes, and the police basically did write it off more or less as being, it's only prostitutes. And then, of course, he killed a girl who was not a prostitute. And then there was this huge public outcry, and it was really when the case began being taken much more seriously. And I think that brings into play, I mean, this is another thing that I was trying to do as a female writer approaching true crime, because true crime has been a genre which traditionally has been dominated by men, with notable exceptions. I think Anne Rule is a very notable exception. But, I was trying to review and reevaluate this whole approach to victims and what you can. There's often this categorization of victims in true crime, women, the female victims, as either being kind of angelic ciphers, the kind of blonde Sharon Tate type, or these kind of femme fatales who somehow deserve their fate. And this is what happened with Elizabeth Short. And, I was trying to break through that and try and really evaluate her as an individual and as a person, and get away from some of that typography which characterizes true crime writing.
We only got about 8 minutes left with you tonight. I want to get to a couple of questions from our audience, if you wouldn't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Dale is asking, Piu, which is better, the Black Dahlia case or the Dead Duke?
The book or the case?
Let's go with both. We got time.
I mean, I don't think you can really say one is better than the other. They're just so different. And I think they're both compelling in very different ways. I have had readers who love both, and I've had readers who really like one but not the other. The ones who like one but not the other tend to be readers who are very attached to the environment of the book. So, for example, someone who's a real Hollywood aficionado who loves film noir might love the Dahlia book but be a bit, not be that interested in The Dead Duke, because that is really a whole different world. That's kind of Victorian London. And for me, though, there isn't really a contradiction. For me, the whole interest of writing books is that you explore a different world. I think, again, this goes back to what kind of writer you are. There are writers like, for example, James Ellroy, where every book is about Los Angeles, and that is his universe, is Los Angeles. That's what he wants to write about. There are other writers who might write quite different books, and in each book is a world unto itself, and I'm quite like that. I do revisit worlds. In a sense, I did that with Manson. I mean, Manson was obviously Hollywood, and then I revisited it with the Dahlia, but, it was a different period. It was a different medium. There were lots of things that were different about it. So I think it's not a question of which is better than the other. I think they're just very, very different.
Dale was actually asking about the books. Which book do you think is better?
The books rather than the case. That is very difficult. I think the Dahlia is probably better because I wrote it later, and I think every time with every book, you learn something. And with every book is a new experience, you improve on things. So, for example, in the Dead Duke, in my writing, I try and combine the narrative and the story of what happened with an examination of the history and the social setting and, contemporary literature and so on. I think with the Dead Duke, I had some problems in combining those things. So, for example, there are chapters that deal with narrative, and then it goes into social history, and then it goes back to narrative. And I think I combined those elements better in the Dahlia. But it's still difficult because there are whole sections of the Dahlia where I had to go into the history of police corruption, and it was necessary to do that in order to understand what happened. But there were still some readers who felt that was too much, who said, oh God, we have to read all about the corruption in the LAPD. Why can't we just read about the investigation of the case? So there were still some readers who felt there was a little bit too much of that. And it is a hard thing to combine the two elements when you're writing and to keep everyone happy, because in the end, everybody has a different idea of, what they really want to know.
Gail is asking, getting back to the murder scene, were the mouth cuts a message of some kind, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think they were. What they mean is, of course, a different matter. They were a coded message. And I think that this goes back to the telling comment that Dylan made in his letter to Dr. DeRiver, where he said that she may have mocked the killer. That word is very important because I think it suggests this idea of, okay, you're laughing at me. It's like the saying when you say you'll laugh on the other side of your face. It's that sense, now look who's laughing. Carving that smile on her face. I mean, that to me is very, very telling. And I think that could be, there have been a lot of, there's a certain strand of interpretation that says this is all a gang thing and it's a Glasgow smile and all that. I don't see that. I see that as being a personal statement. I don't see the hallmarks of an official gang killing. When I say it was a gang-style rape, what I mean is there were a group of people involved. I don't see it, and there was an organized crime element in the sense that Hanson had these connections and that was the reason for the cover-up. I don't see it as an organized crime killing itself, because it was very unusual at that point for organized gangs like the mafia and so forth to kill women in the first place. And if they did, it usually was much more, discreet. They would just disappear effectively. You wouldn't have that, someone cut in half and thrown on a sidewalk like that. I mean, inviting attention from the newspapers, from the press and so forth. I mean, I just don't see that,
In a minute or less, because we do got to get you to introduce your books, because we only got about 3 minutes left with you. Bob is asking, he's like, in the last decade, there was a movie created called Blue Dahlia, even though he hasn't seen it. How accurate is the movie comparatively to the incident, if you've seen it?
Well, if he's talking about the Blue Dahlia, that was a movie that came out just before the actual Dahlia murder. And so it came out just before, so it's not actually about the murder at all. But what was interesting about that movie is that it gave the name, it was the inspiration for the name the Black Dahlia. Because when Elizabeth Short, she was this beautiful, striking woman with the black hair, she used to hang around the soda fountain at Long Beach at one point, and the soldiers and sailors who were there saw her, and she used to have a flower pinned in her hair. And there was this popular movie called The Blue Dahlia, which had just come out. And so they got to calling her the Black Dahlia. And of course, that was then swooped on by the press, and it became the sensational headline. And it's another reason, in my opinion, why the case has lived on. And in fact, the contemporary police officers gave that theory. They said, one of the reasons it's become so famous is actually the name is so evocative, the Black Dahlia.
My friend, thank you so much for coming on Spaced Out Radio tonight. I know you had to get up early in order to do this for our audience, but Piu, we really, really appreciate it. Do me a favor, tell our audience where they can find this book and the rest of the books you've written.
All my books are available on Amazon.com, and the Dahlia certainly is available in a lot of bookshops in the US, and if it's not in the bookshop, you can order it through the bookshop.
And your website, PiuEatwell.com.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. What a real treat it was to have you talking about the Black Dahlia and filling us all in on the new information that you have received over the last couple of years. I hope to do it again with you sometime very, very soon.
Sure. Look forward to it.
Excellent. Coming up next, we have Everett Themer and The Encounter.
This is the winter of our lives. We come to play the final scene. The curtains closing in the darkness we expose what lies beneath.
We are entering The Encounter tonight with Everett Themer as we take a look around the world at the news of the day, the strange, the weird, the WTF. The news is always changing. That's why we bring you The Encounter. And don't forget to search Facebook for the latest news on our Facebook page, facebook.com/SOR The Encounter. Give it a like if you do not mind. Mr. Everett Themer, how you doing?
I am doing great. What an interview.
That was fantastic. Piu was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
That was a lot of fun.
I just can't believe that it just seems like there is zero interest on the part of the LAPD to even try and close the case.
That does seem weird, but a case that old, what do you do about that?
I hear you, but you would have to think that there would be siblings left. The parents obviously not, but maybe a sibling or two might like some closure on their sister.
You're right, but I really don't know. I mean, it's an interesting case. It's a fascinating case. It's one that after hearing this, I want to go back and revisit.
Yeah, me too. Great detail by Piu Eatwell, and when she brings in more true crime, we're definitely going to have her back on, even though she didn't like getting up at like 5:45 in the morning to do this interview because she's over in France right now, but we thank her for doing that. Everett, let's get to The Encounter. We had a good weekend, some strange stories came about, and we're always into the weird, the strange, and the WTF. Hit us up with a good story.
Well, do you know a lot of people who have switched over to the electronic cigarettes versus the traditional cigarette?
Yes, absolutely.
And they all kind of have that attitude of they've become better than everybody else. And
yep.
Kind of look down that thing at you while you're in the corner kind of puffing away. There's a study out of England, and it was printed in the journal Thorax, that has indicated that electronic cigarettes may be more dangerous than we thought.
Of course.
That they are not the healthy alternative that they are apparently marketed as a healthy alternative in the UK. Here in the US, not so much, but they found that the vapor and the liquid will give you symptoms that are similar to, or the effect that you have chronic lung disease.
That would not surprise me. You know, the way these vape pens have taken off over the last 5-6 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I go to my daughter's high school, and literally you see kids walking out of the doors of the school, and they are already vaping.
Yeah, that's dangerous. That's surprising. And here in the U.S., you have to be 18 to buy them.
Well, I think here you got to be 19. But that doesn't stop kids. I mean, they always get cigarettes somehow too, right? Or alcohol or whatever it is.
Well, yeah, they do. Their kids are kids. But still, the chemical, the vapor in this e-liquid that they put in them, it reduces the amount of these cells in your lungs that are there to keep your lungs clear. Yeah, those. These cells and these chemicals that flush the pollutants and bacteria out of your lungs. It reduces that, so your lungs are not as effective at fighting off disease, illnesses. And while they don't specifically say it, the idea of inhaling a warm liquid repeatedly into your lungs could at some point not only cause symptoms of chronic lung disease, but I think potentially pneumonia.
Yeah, that is real ugly. Real ugly. But I mean, you know, let's face it here. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. With the amount of pollutants that vehicles and industry puts out, not that I'm being environmental here, okay, or even right now, like our area here, it is very, very tough to breathe due to the forest fire smoke. And it's pretty much that way across Western North America right now. So when it comes to vaping, or even cigarettes or pot or whatever it may be, are we just looking for excuses to lung disease?
You may be right, but you know, ideally, nobody would inhale anything. There is still the potential that these electronic cigarettes will reduce your risk of things like cancer and heart disease. But what this is showing is that it's still damaging to the lungs. And in cases like the Western United States and Western Canada, where right now there are so many pollutants in the air, if you're reducing the effectiveness of your lungs to fight off debris and illness and disease, that's just as bad as smoking, if not worse.
What's the new replacement then? Because obviously, if these vapes are having that much of a problem with the chemicals that you are inhaling into your body, much like cigarettes, I mean, it's almost like a ripoff because, yes, you have to get people addicted to it, okay? Let's face it. You knew there was going to be something in there that got people addicted to it. And all they really had to do was go with the flavors, because there's some pretty cool flavors. I tried my nephew's out. He had like this cotton candy. That tasted good. I'm not going to lie. It tasted very, very good. But nonetheless, I mean, when you go through it, why is it so hard to try and build like a healthy cigarette or a healthy vape? Why is it so hard?
I think it would be hard because your lungs, regardless of whether it's smoke or a liquid vapor, your lungs aren't designed to repeatedly inhale particulates like that. And remember, smoke is a particulate. Even the chemicals in these vaping liquids, when you break them down, they're a particulate, and they're not. Your lungs were never designed to inhale things like that repeatedly and constantly.
Right. Going by Jeff's comment at hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter, propylene, glycol, and vegetable glycerin flavors. Some are bad. I stopped smoking cigs in 2009, been vaping since then, have stopped getting sick, no hacking in the morning when I wake up. So obviously it's worked for him.
Well, I think they have their place. I did vaping for a long time. I went from cigarettes to vaping, and then I went back to cigarettes, and now I vape between cigarettes, which I imagine is probably a serious problem.
Not you having an addiction like that. Coffee, cigarettes, in between cigarette vaping. Wow. All right, let's move on to story number 2, my friend.
You knew that Trump's Space Force wasn't going to go away, right?
Of course not. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
And this is a questionable gift that they've given us. They released 6 designs for potential logos for the upcoming Space Force.
Right.
And these designs were emailed to Donald Trump campaign supporters. First, the reactions on Twitter were incredible. Nobody really had anything positive to say about these things. Everything from these look like stickers that my kids get at the dentist to comments like it looks like they're not even trying. But in this email, what was stated is that whatever logo is picked is going to be put on merchandise and sold for the Trump campaign, for the Trump re-election campaign.
They do not look very, very professional.
No, they're horrible.
They look childish. They look like something an artist out of the 40s or 50s would draw. Maybe they were going for that retro look. I really don't know. But I mean, they look ridiculous.
I think the closest to a professional one would be the one that they basically swiped from NASA.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them are a bit ridiculous looking, but I think the bigger issue or the bigger question is, how is Trump and Trump's campaign allowed to take this logo and put it on merchandise for his re-election campaign? Any potential presidential candidate can't go and grab the Marine logo or the Navy logo or any military branch or agency's logo and stick it on merchandise to sell for their own campaign.
Well, sometimes Mr. President has a little bit of a ball of confusion with what he can and cannot take. Not saying I love him, not saying I hate him.
He does, but I expect some uproar here soon, because this seems to be a pretty good violation of some ethics policies, and I would imagine re-election laws.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Maybe some copyright and trademark violations too.
Well, we'll soon see. Because Lord knows I can't see Mike Pence wearing a Space Force T-shirt or a Space Force tie.
The Space Force, the gift that keeps on giving.
I know. So much of that recently. So much of that. Let's move on to story number 3.
There's going to be a new visible man-made star in the sky. This October, an artist is going to launch this object that will unfold into about a 3 football field size satellite-like diamond-shaped wing that will be towed, and it is going to orbit the Earth. You'll be able to see it about 4 times a day. It's going to orbit the Earth for a while, and then it's going to come and crash back down to the Earth. He's doing this to illustrate the idea of how the government is capturing information and grabbing data and spying on people.
This reminds me of a story from like the late 80s, early 90s in Vancouver, where an artist had set up a brick square. And in the middle of that square, he was going to put a live mouse, and then he was going to drop a brick on top of the mouse, killing it as art to prove a point. Do we not have enough space debris up there, or do we really need to use space to bring up a point like this that everybody already knows?
Well,
I mean, there's enough garbage up there. We don't need it. Even if it does come crashing down, I'm sure there's still going to be pieces floating around up there.
No, it is designed to basically burn up entirely on re-entry. But the artist, Trevor Peglin, did say, and you have to love the way artists speak sometimes, because he said that this is an extremely logically intensive project. It definitely isn't something that an artist can just do in their studio. Space is actually really, really big, and it's extremely unlikely that it will collide with anything else.
Yeah, except where all the satellites are, because that's the orbit you're going to be using.
Yes.
The brilliancy of that, unbelievable.
They didn't say where he's getting his funding to be able to afford to launch this up on he's using a SpaceX Falcon 9, one of their launch vehicles, and on one of their trips, where he's getting his funding to be able to afford to basically launch a 3 football field size wing into space.
I mean, I do have to admit, it would be cool to see, but at some point, you have to have some brains. Once again, I mean, how many times do we talk about wastes of money?
Do you know what it costs to hitch a ride on a SpaceX launch?
I'm going to say a few million. If I recall, weren't the Russians sending people up in their shuttles for like $25 million a person?
Possibly. I think you're right. Somewhere I want to say that I had heard that somebody had something launched on a SpaceX, and it was right around somewhere between $9 and $12 million to have their payload put up. But you can't quote me on that. But either way, let's say it's $9 million to have it launched. Couldn't he make the statement a better way?
Absolutely he could. Absolutely he could.
I mean, I understand the idea of this thing because the way it will orbit, it will be visible 4 times per day, pretty much everywhere. I understand and I can appreciate the idea of seeing this thing just moving across the sky. But that's not much different than watching the ISS go across the sky.
I like watching satellite. The ISS. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. When you look at all that crap that is up there, and you hear space organizations state, that it's getting more and more cluttered every day because, I mean, let's face it, every time they put up a new satellite, they shut one down. Well, very rarely does that satellite come back. It just sits there adrift in orbit.
Well, hopefully one day the Space Force will be able to come and get that, huh?
Never know. Never know. I think we got time for one more, my friend.
In Vancouver, do you guys have the pay per minute or half hour scooter services where you can basically just rent a scooter from almost like a kiosk?
Yes.
And yeah.
You can rent bicycles too.
See, I think that's a good idea. I think that, in terms of urban traffic and commuting in the city, it seems like it would be a good idea. But in California, they're not too happy with it. In fact, people in San Francisco are taking the electric scooters and throwing them in the ocean, wiping poop on them, starting them on fire, cutting their brake lines, all in response to the way that people are renting and driving them and the recklessness that they show when they use them. So now some cities and towns are looking at how to regulate, license, and revamp these programs to prevent the continual damage that people are doing to these things while they're parked out on the streets or while they're being used or, just sitting there.
I forgot to turn my mic on. I apologize.
No.
Mayor Gregor Robinson in Vancouver actually went and, when he was elected, I think about 8 years ago or so, went and put in a bunch of bike lanes. Now, if you've ever driven through Vancouver, you know it's hell at the best of times. And then when you cut down a bunch of the thoroughfares and one-way streets down to 1 lane or 2 lanes from 3, it is terrible. But his thought was, if we put more bike lanes in, less people will drive into the city. They will use taxis, buses, SkyTrain, and whatever. Well, the population has kept on growing and growing and growing. And really, it's done nothing but cause congestion. One of the other things it's done is it has also given a real attitude to people on bikes. And sometimes they don't even care if they're in their little green lane. They still go into traffic and bitch you out.
I think they do that everywhere. They seem to have a smugness about them, as if they're doing more for the world than the typical driver.
I know.
But at the same time, when I've been down in the city, there are times where I wish I had a bike because getting around in a car can be difficult at best.
I hear you. But some people, some people believe that the alternative, and hey, you know what? Let's face it. Cycling is more healthy than driving a car. That's only obvious. We're stating the obvious there. That's how brilliant we are here on this show.
And again, we've sort of veered off topic because most of this ire that people have towards these is directed at those small electric scooters that people can rent.
Yeah.
So that's not really any healthier than driving, but I think it has the potential to alleviate some congestion.
I hear you.
If you have one person in a car versus, how many people can fit in that same space on electric scooters? 4, 5, 6. It certainly has the potential to help a little bit with the congestion and traffic.
I agree.
These people seem to be quite disgusted with the drivers and riders of these scooters.
Oh. Scooter people are dangerous. Completely dangerous. Let's get to the thought of the day. Thought of the Day happens every night at this time, where we put a question on our Facebook page. It moves over to Twitter, and then we ask you your thoughts, because we love the audience participation on this show, and the more we can get you involved, the better. So today's Thought of the Day is this: what is your favorite true crime story to follow, and why? Lots of different ones tonight, Everett. What's yours?
There are so many. Mine, I think, would be the I-80, the idea that there's a serial killer on I-80.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I'd have to go with a Canadian one, and that would be Robert Willie Picton.
Yeah, that for me. That would be a close second. That one's definitely up there in the strange factor.
Oh, that one's just pure ugly. Pure ugly. And, as grotesque as that is, I'm fascinated with that story because it has just a little bit of everything. Well, let's find out what everyone else thinks. John in British Columbia says the Zodiac is a pretty interesting case. We've talked to a few people about that on this show. Chuck jumps in and says the first one that comes to mind is D.B. Cooper. All of the unanswered questions. Who was he? Did he die or live? Did he get away and live to spend the money? It's all so interesting. William jumps in and says, my first marriage. Always somebody about the marriage. Everett, there's always somebody about the marriage.
Of course there is.
Mm-hmm. The Ukrainian watermelon, Ronnie Moniak, says, Canadian cultural suicide facilitated by Justin Trudeau and his merry gaggle of liberal founders. I look forward to an election. The jubilant defeat perspective gives hope and faith in a nation to overcome tyranny. Getting a little political, aren't we there, Ukrainian watermelon? As he sits outside watching the Perseid meteor shower that I cannot see due to the forest fire smoke. Angie jumps in. True crime? I like serial killers like H.H. Holmes. It's crazy trying to get into their heads how they planned stuff. Ted Bundy, because, this is from Robin, because he's local and I read the book The Stranger Beside Me. I find him interesting on how he changed his appearance 6 times, not being able to get caught. I think he didn't get Bundy. If he didn't get caught, Bundy probably would have became something like a president or something along those lines. Joshua, down in California. Ames Mole Hunt. My great aunt was the one who kicked off the whole manhunt. Well, that's kind of cool. SOR Cat. The Black Dahlia. Good one. We got that one tonight. Noel jumps in. I'm typically intrigued by serial killers, the psychology behind their behavior, nature versus nurture, etc. A few favorites, Eileen Wuornos. Simple fact that she was a woman. Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer. They are all unique in their own ways, but they all felt the need to murder. Uncle Dale comes in. Missing 411. Those are some amazing cases by David Paulides. Hey, Ev?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Still trying to get him on the air. Don't know if we ever will, but we're going to try. He has a good mustache, David Paulides. Really good mustache. So he can pretty much do what he wants. When you got a power stash like that, you have that ability. Kevin. George H. Bush supervising the killing of John F. Kennedy with a contractor hit team plan and backed by the CIA. Nothing conspiratorial about that. Marty jumps in. George Knapp did a story about a kidnapped baby in Chicago back in the 1960s named Paul Fronczak. The crime turned out to be a triple mystery. The FBI thought they found him and returned him to the family, only to find out that it was the wrong child. And after that further investigation, it was discovered the child they found had a twin sister. No trace of the original Fronczak baby or the new boy's twin sister have ever been found. Odd. Very odd. Let's go over to Twitter. Go ahead, Ev.
I think I just found a new favorite true crime case.
Yeah, we got to find out about that one. Jake jumps in. Got to be D.B. Cooper. Amazing how the guy pulled it off. Plus, it's interesting on where the guy jumped out of the plane. A lot say Washington State. However, there is now speculation is that he jumped close to Reno, Nevada. Interesting. Another one here. Michelle, I like the ones that are unsolved. Lizzie Borden, the Valeska axe murderers, Black Dahlia, as we talked about tonight. Let's get to Renee. There are so many that I find interesting, but my favorite are the cold cases, and probably the one I find the most interesting, H.H. Holmes. And the possibility of H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper being possibly the same dude. H.H. Holmes was in London at the time of the Ripper murders. We'll get to one more. Michael McNeil. The truckloads of missing money that was sent to Iraq from the U.S., missing antiquities from Egypt and Iraq, the $2.9 trillion missing from the Pentagon announced by Donald Rumsfeld the day before 9/11, the real story of what happened on 9/11, Donald Trump's tax returns. I'm with Dale on David Paulides' stories. They are some of the creepiest I've ever heard. There are more, but those are some of my favorites. Oh, and I almost forgot the real-life encounters with gnomes in Northern California. Yeah, you had to get that in, didn't you, Pen Man? Had to get that in. You're lucky I read them cold. Everett Themer, let everybody know where they can find the encounter.
They can find the encounter at facebook.com/SOR The Encounter Online.
Thank you so much. We will talk to you tomorrow night. Thank you to Piu Eatwell for coming on Spaced Out Radio tonight to talk about the Black Dahlia affair. You can find all her books on Amazon.com. Tomorrow night on the program, Kenya Aisa is here talking spiritual life skills. Let's find our Zen and Chi together, shall we? I think we all need bandanas for that. So we'll find some bandanas. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thank you to everybody listening at home, in your cars, at work, wherever you may be. Special thanks for everyone participating on Spreaker. Great chat with all of you tonight. Thank you so much. Also on Twitter, some fabulous snark at hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and the Veterans Club, the SOR Space Travelers on Facebook. You are rocking it as well. Thanks for sharing the show. Thanks for telling your friends and doing your part to help us grow each and every night, because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Good night.
We're watching.